The rangatahi courts were first started in 2008 in New Zealand and are a response to the disproportionate overrepresentation of the Indigenous people of New Zealand in our court systems and in our detention centres. The rangatahi courts themselves, the essence of them is that they incorporate Indigenous culture and Indigenous language and Indigenous protocols into the process of the court, but it's still a formal court system that's involved. It's the same law that applies to every young person in New Zealand that's being applied, so it is still a formal justice system, except the idea has been to incorporate Indigenous culture into the process. Well, the first result is one that's probably been underestimated at this stage. The Treaty of Waitangi was the founding document of New Zealand, and it was signed in 1840 by the tribal leaders of the Maori people and the British Crown. And so New Zealand was colonised by the British, and next Friday is in fact the 175th anniversary of the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi. From 1840 until 2008, the criminal justice system in New Zealand was monocultural and monolingual, and there was no use of the Māori language or Māori cultural protocols in the court system, and that meant that the rangatahi court in 2008 was the first time Māori language and Māori culture. It was the first time for a criminal court in New Zealand that the court had sat at the marae, which is a traditional meeting place for Māori. And it's the first time that elders, respected elders, were invited to sit alongside judges in the court. The response from the Māori communities throughout the country has been overwhelming. We have, since 2008, now established 12 rangatahi courts in total throughout the country, and we are still dealing with requests from other communities to have rangatahi courts established in their particular communities so that the community can take ownership, can have some participation and input into dealing with their young people who are getting into trouble and who are vulnerable and at risk. There's a number of key factors. It does require vision, a vision about doing what we think is the right thing to do, and it requires judicial leadership. It certainly would not happen without the judicial leaders involved being supportive and actively promoting the idea as a good one. It requires the buy-in of the stakeholder community, the justice community must be supportive of it, and that requires a lot of consultation with the stakeholders, and we have certainly received stakeholder support to do this. And finally, it requires the community to take ownership of the concept and also to take ownership of their own young people in their communities. And that's what this amounts to. So there's a combination of key factors that are required to bring this together. I do think it is applicable, and I would suggest that one of the questions that needs to be asked in other countries is whether there is such a thing as a culturally neutral justice system. Because if one asks that question of his or her own justice system, the answer usually is it will be the dominant culture, and it will be a monocultural and monolingual justice system that is being applied in their country. What room does that leave for Indigenous cultures if they are not the dominant culture in that country? What room does it leave for other cultures who live alongside the dominant culture? I think that there's some big questions to be asked by the countries who are here today, and the first question is, do we have a truly culturally neutral justice system? I don't believe you can have one. I don't believe you can have a culturally neutral justice system. So I think it's worth asking, what is your justice system? in terms of that cultural identity of the system.